again, and we are back to do the first quadrant of the MIST program application for spring 2024, and that is the personal information quadrant found within Cal State Apply. And naturally, as it sounds, this is primarily focused on personal identifying information, most of which is really self-explanatory and also pre-filled from your account profile that you've already created for Cal State Apply. But there are some little things here worth discussing. And so I'll go through each of the subsections just to be safe. And some of these are really important from kind of a tuition standpoint and also from a document identification standpoint. So there are little things that can help make your application process and ultimately your matriculation and kind of time through the program a little bit easier to deal with. So the first would be this idea of the different sections within the application itself. For all quadrants in the Cal State Apply application, it needs to show that you've completed them for you to ultimately be able to submit your application. So you can see there's 7 subsections within this particular part of the application, this quadrant of the application. And unless all 7 of them are checked off as completed, in theory, the application won't allow you to submit because it views you as having outstanding items that it needs for you to ultimately have completed to be able to submit the application. So we'll go through these kind of step by step. The first step, pretty simple, release statement, basically identifying that everything you put in your application is true and honest, and it's as you say it to be, which is very important for all sorts of good reasons. So you're kind of there notating that what you've shared is accurate and truthful information. Secondly, you give us a release of contact information, and this gives me the ability to contact you about your application status. It's really the only reason as a program will reach out to you is just to let you know kind of what you're missing, how we can help you, things of that information. I promise we're not too heavy in terms of spamming you with emails. Now, in terms of biographic information, most of this is relatively straightforward. You're going to provide your legal name, but under the naming categories here, this is really important. Your former name, should you have a different last name or even a different first name, if your name has changed over time, this could be really important in terms of the transcripts and/or test scores that you're providing us. This is very common for people to get married, their last name changes, and then ultimately the admissions office can sometimes have some issues pairing that transcript with your application because they just view that as 2 separate people. Naturally, there could be multiple people with similar names applying for different programs. So what you would want to do here is just notate yes, if that's the case, and share that list of names that you previously had in case that kind of stands to be what's happening in your own individual case. So this is naturally a case-by-case situation, but if you did have a last name or first name change since the time you completed previous education, you would want to notate that as yes. If you're someone who has a preferred name, you can also notate the next box as yes, and then provide that name. We're happy to call you whatever you'd like to be called, but we just need to know what that is if that's the case. So if you prefer to have a nickname or you go by your middle name instead of your first name, so on and so forth, just notate that for us so that we can, adequately call you what you prefer to be called. From there, the rest of the information I think is relatively straightforward. It's primarily just data collection information, and you can share that with us in terms of birth information and all of that type of good stuff. Now, in terms of contact information, this is actually really important for a few different reasons. Your current address is important because a lot of times it helps us gain a good understanding of if your California residency matches what you'll share in the next section. Naturally, also some of the information from CSUMB is going to be sent to this mailing address. So I always recommend this be an address that you constantly either go to or that you currently live at or work at so that any information sent to you via kind of traditional snail mail can reach you. And naturally, this also holds true with your phone and your email. While I at the program, I generally do not call students unless they call me first. It is good for the university to have should outside offices want to contact you, such as financial aid or student services. These folks may want to give you a call. And so in that case, having an accurate phone number is really, really important. Similarly, email is a preferred contact route for us at the program level. So I'm going to contact you at the email that you provide here, unless you email me separately and send me a preferred email address. That's fine too, but I'm going to default to the email you provide in Cal State Apply because I'm assuming that's your preferred email address. Okay, so sometimes, unfortunately, students create kind of fake emails to put in here because they're trying to avoid spam. And I promise you, both Liaison, the company that creates Cal State Apply, and us at the university and program level are not interested in bombarding you with emails. We just provide information about your application. Okay, so once that's done, you would hit save and continue, and then move on to the citizenship and residency information section. And this one's pretty straightforward. If you're a US citizen, you would notate that. If you're not, you would select the appropriate option. And then from there, you would want to notate what state you currently live in or kind of provide residency within. And then if you can claim California residency, you would hit yes. And if you've lived in California continuously since birth, you would hit yes. The importance for both of these is twofold. One is naturally a tuition item. If you're a California resident, you're naturally going to be charged in-state tuition. If you have not lived in California continuously since birth, sometimes that can lead to either non-citizenship status or non-California residency status as well. So those can be kind of hiccup type items. The reason this matters is that in some cases, if you're identified as a non-US citizen or a non-domestic student, that can default to you needing to prove kind of a test of English fluency. That's generally quite rare, but if that were to happen, that would probably happen because you selected a non-US citizen status, or that you have not lived in California continuously since birth, or that you're not a California resident. That would really be the three scenarios where that might happen. Still very relatively rare, but that could impact your application from that perspective. It wouldn't hurt you in terms of admissions. It would just change what those requirements ultimately are to be admitted. Okay. From there, race and ethnicity, I'm not going to spend a significant amount of time on. I think this is a relatively straightforward section of the application. So you can notate your ethnicity, your race, and then a summary in terms of racial ethnicity backgrounds and things of that situation. I put decline to state just for the sake of the application, but feel free to share this information based on your own personal background. The other information section is actually strangely really important. I wish they didn't name this other information because it sometimes leads people to just kind of skip over this section as quickly as possible. If you have a social security number and you plan on receiving financial aid through the university, it is super important that you include it on your application. And the reason being is that it's actually kind of difficult to give the university your social security number after applying. You'd actually have to kind of get in contact with our student services center and then give them your social security number, and then they can manually put it into your student account. It's much, much easier if you just include it in Cal State Apply. And then that way, once Cal State Apply kind of sees your application, your ultimate student account is created at CSUMB. And from there, different offices that need that information, most specifically financial aid, would be able to see your social security number and use that as part of their aid deferment process. Okay, so that's really, really important that you include that social security number should that be a plan of yours in terms of how you plan to fund the program. Language proficiency, naturally, you probably want to lean towards English if English is your first language. If it is not, you can add another language and then notate your fluency within those languages. Military status and military dependency is another thing that impacts tuition. So if you're someone who is either a current military member or has served in the United States military or falls in that dependent category, that could impact things such as the GI Bill or other forms of VA-based funding. So certainly if you're somebody who's going to make use of the various forms of veteran tuition services, it's very natural that you'd want to make sure that that's notated here within your application. So it just helps once again with the processing of those forms of aid. Should you be eligible for them, we'd love for you to be able to use them. It's just easier if you notate that in your application. But even then, we can work around that after submission if that is not adequately provided here. The academic standing and academic infractions and conduct sections are also really, really important. Are you in good standing with your last school attended is essentially asking if you've been academically disqualified, if you've been if you've gotten in any kind of personal issues or problems in a past university. This is more like from an academic or student conduct perspective. So in most cases, 99.9% of the time, it's going to be a yes. If it's not, you'll be given a drop-down box to notate this. So let's say you had a GPA issue, or you had a student housing issue, so on and so forth. You can notate that here in the application. It's quite rare, but we have had students who, for example, just didn't perform well at one of the universities, and so they have to notate that here. And it's not going to be used against you. It's helpful for me to know, okay, well, maybe they weren't as successful at that particular institution. We're just going to go ahead to set that aside and focus on the institutions where they have met the requirements for our degree program. But you do need to include that there just so that we can understand the variety of kind of student, kind of academic things that you've gone through. So we're helping to make a better understanding of where you've come as a student and not use that against you as well. Okay. And we wouldn't. I want to make that very clear, but it's just helpful for us to know where you kind of came from and now where you're going. Okay. And similarly, if you've gotten to any types of issues for academic performance, academically disqualified, disciplined, so on and so forth, you would have those questions in an accompanying Dropbox to notate what those issues are. This is kind of a small thing, but it is a requirement. The teacher or other education credential information, it's going to give you a drop-down box if you plan on applying for a teaching credential in the future. That's not terribly important. I recommend for most folks to just hit the not interested in a credential program because it's never going to make an impact on your application for our individual program. Okay. CalFresh is one of those great resources for students if you qualify for it. And so if you do qualify for it, by all means, you can notate that you're interested in checking your eligibility for it. If you do, I highly recommend taking advantage of it. If you don't, you can go ahead and select no. And then for the RN license, this is something that really relates to other programs, but because with Cal State Apply, they're trying to make kind of a one-stop shop application. They'll notate if you have an RN license. If you do, you can include it. You don't have to, even if you do. It's not very relevant for our program, but that's naturally something there. And then there's kind of a how did you hear about us question with a accompanying Dropbox of a variety of options of ways that you might have heard about our particular program. This is really helpful for the program to better understand how you came to us and kind of how we can market our outreach to students. So I really appreciate it if you answer this honestly, but you can answer it however you feel comfortable. It's not going to have any bearing on your application. And then lastly is financial and parental information. Since most of you applying for this program, in fact, I would assume all of you are going to be non-dependents, you're going to naturally notate that for you, you're probably somebody who's, an independent. That's in most circumstances the way that you're going to notate this in your application. And because of that, that's going to lead to filling out some of the independent information. I've just filled this with true information, I guess is the best way to put this. But you'll put your household size, any number of dependents that you have, your adjusted gross income, any untaxed income that you might have, and then your parental education information. The parental education information, not terribly important for this application. What is your income information, because this could impact forms of financial aid, things like CalFresh, other student support services that are income based, right? So you do want to make sure that this is accurate, and ultimately you'll be providing that tax documentation if necessary anyway, so it will be cross-referenced. So just do the best that you can is generally what I recommend for students here. Give us a good ballpark figure, and from there, that will help the corresponding offices make the most informed decisions on how to apply aid to your particular case. Okay. And after you've done that, you would hit save and continue for all of this. And then you would be able to either continue on to the next section or go back to the application dashboard that shows all of the quadrants. And there you go. You'd be completed with the personal information quadrant at this point in time. So I hope that was helpful in terms of talking about some of those little things that do matter for your student account and for your student application. In our next video, we'll focus on the academic history quadrant. Take care, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.